we could have different identity providers, but it's really it's going to really be up to you to make sure that those users of your application are provisioned with the proper amount of privilege, least privilege, hopefully, making sure that they cannot do anything malicious with your software. They can't jailbreak it. It's really, developers are going to be held more accountable, I think, more than anything. I think that's the direction that I'm seeing things go in.
I agree with Jeff on the layered aspect of having identification preceding authentication, and then the authorization aspect in terms of rights and privileges granted to that identity itself once they're authenticated, and that is true. But the challenge that we are going to face as part of the world we are living in today is this need for single sign-on between systems. And this not just within our internal intranet space itself, it's now going to go across our boundaries from our enterprise, and then we have to go down to this world of federation and federated identities between companies and between whether it's B2Bs, B2Cs, or just across another entity altogether. So what we've been doing so far is we've been using SAML as part of the token-based authentication, SAML 2.0 as a standard, the de facto standard that we've been using to be able to say that I can get my identity and then I give these attributes tied to that identity, the token as such, and that's being marshaled across the boundaries, and then they would be able to verify that trust and then give you access or not. The problem then actually comes is whether we use SAML or we take Liberty Alliance's, the whole ID framework that they use, which now, by the way, is called Kantara. I'm not sure if you're aware or not. Liberty Alliance is known as Kantara, which is Swahili for the word bridge and Arabic for the word harmony. So they want to build a harmonious bridge between systems for you and me as AppSec, AppSec folks, not just application folks, but AppSec folks. It's not the bridge that I'm worried about. It's the water under the bridge and those who are lurking in that waters, which are the fishers, right? So those are the ones that I'm worried about. And by the way, pardon me because I'm a shark biologist at Hord, so I have to go back to my fish analogies. That's how I understand and learn security. So it's the fishers that I'm really concerned, and as part of the fishers, it's to be able to get those threat agents around, especially if I'm going to now marshal that data or that attribute for that identity across boundaries. So federation is becoming more and more needed. Internally, you can use like Kerberos and other authentication mechanisms to have that ticket to grant you that federated identity. But externally, when you go, you can't implement something across domains if you don't have a standard. And SAML and Liberty Alliances, and there's another one called Shibboleth, which is used in educational institutions. Those have been kind of stabs at trying to solve this problem, but I think there's an even more pressing problem, which is now if I federate my identity from my company to yours and you get hacked, then who is the person going to go after, me or you, right? And so that actually is a legal question, and there's a lawyer in the panel here, so we'll defer it to the lawyer, Who do you go after?
Yeah, so probably everybody. I mean, if you're a lawyer and somebody screws up, you sue everybody, right? Let the courts figure it out. Yeah, frankly, I have two schools of thought on this issue, really. In one hand, the law is very unclear, particularly with cyberspace involved. The law is just, they haven't been tested and they haven't been applied in this universe. We've got, 150 years of law related to identity in the real world, and translating those principles to cyberspace is always a little crazy. The physics of cyberspace is just straight up different than it is in the real world. So the translation is not always straightforward. In the real world, you can pretty much only have one identity. Maybe you can pull off two if you're cheating on your wife or something. Not that I'm recommending that. But in cyberspace, you can and probably should have multiple identities, right? I don't want to necessarily make my Facebook identity exactly the same as my Twitter one, as the one that I expose here at OWASP or professionally. Like, those are all different identities, and they have different communities that rely on that identity. That's an aspect that makes identity online really, really different. Lawrence Lessig talks about the physics of cyberspace being different. He says, you can have laws about stealing books and so on, but we don't have laws about stealing buildings. Because you can't do it in the real world. But in cyberspace, the physics are different. You can copy whole encyclopedias of information, and you can steal a building's worth of data. And so the laws need to be different, and the courts are really bad at interpreting and translating real-world laws into cyberspace context. I went to law school with a bunch of really smart people, and not one of them would have understood one word that's been said in this conference. They just, as a class of individuals, they're generally not very technical. No offense to them, they're brilliant, but not technical. So the idea that they're the ones going to be responsible for interpreting the laws and making decisions in this space is a little terrifying. So it's not surprising there's a lot of ambiguity here.
Can you each get out your crystal ball and give us a prediction of where you see identity management going in the next 5 years?
Well, I think it's going to get more complex, but I guess at this moment I'm focused upon the compliance or the enforcement side of what happens after identity management has been compromised. And this is a real life story. 2 weeks ago, I had my new iPhone 4 stolen. I had to go get a new one. Upset me tremendously. And first thing I did, of course, was turn it to AT&T. I says I'd like to make sure my IMEI number is registered, and this is blacklisted. Well, we don't keep blacklists on IMEIs. So, well, that's interesting, but we'll catch them if they try to bring it back to AT&T. Well, the guy had the SIM card out of this thing in 5 minutes. So he knew what he was doing. My tracking software, of course, did not work. So I call Apple, and I say, well, they're probably going to have to come back through iTunes to get this phone registered. The serial number is my identity. You got the IMEI. Can you catch that? Oh, yes. No doubt about it. We'll get them. Whether it's T-Mobile, the UK, or some foreign country, we'll get them. So I wait patiently for 2 weeks to see what happens, and nothing. You get no call back. So I finally contacted Apple, and come to find out that phone had been re-registered to someone else. Now, what good is identity management if you have no enforcement on it, even after the system supposedly works? So we got to get tougher is all I'm saying. And I think people are going to, across the board, understand that this is an international problem. You said it that today it's borderless. We have no borders on this. And when people can break identities across borders, across countries, we haven't solved the problem.
See, so I agree. I think this is going to get, it's not going to clear up in the next 5 years. We're still going to be struggling with identity.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
See if that's my serial number out there.
This is not his iPhone.
So one thing I think we can do to do better here is to take a principled approach to this. And I think the cybersecurity report that just came out is a good first step. I think if you're interested, you should follow Kim Cameron's blog on identity management. She does a really good job. She's outlined 7 identity principles for the identity metaverse, which are really good. And I think we can help the ecosystem along. Eventually, you'd like to see some sort of unified identity system that we can all be confident in. I think the ability to have multiple identities is absolutely critical to that, because that's the only way that you can have privacy. The ability to adopt an essentially anonymous persona in cyberspace and use that is, I think, pretty key. So I'd like to see some of those principles preserved as we build out the identity metasystem. And the other aspect is we've also got to work on assurance. We need confidence that this thing is actually going to work, or the kind of subversions that you're talking about can always happen.
What I would like to see in the next few years is the development of standards that we can all follow, whether we're developers or integrators, We need some guidance so that we're all doing something the same way. I like Jeff's comment about having multiple identities in cyberspace. I think it's apropos with a lot of the ways that we work with cyberspace right now, given that the physics are different. We do have multiple identities. The only time that we really do need to use our own identity is with high-value transactions. And I think that was really one of the focus messages with that DHS draft document, is that we really need to secure the high-value transactions. I think we're doing a good job right now with business-to-business and establishing trusted relationships between vendors and partners and contractors. I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see a move to a more common system, but not with one provider. I think we've all seen some challenges in the PKI space. When we're talking about identity, it's like we're talking about PKI, but it's morphing into something different. And that's the challenge I think that we all face, is that the internet keeps changing every day, and how we establish those trusted relationships change.
I just wanted to follow up real quickly on that multiple identities problem. Did you all know that cars didn't used to have license plates? It used to be anonymous to drive around. And actually there's a big stink when the government tried to make cars have license plates. People thought, I'm giving up my privacy. And now, a few years later, everybody has a license plate. Nobody even thinks about it, right? You're not anonymous out on the road. You're identified. And I love the anonymity of the internet. I think it makes it richer and more powerful. It does open up the possibility for cybercrime. But I think that I do think it's something that needs to be protected, and multiple identities is one way to go with that. But I just want you to realize, like, our privacy protections can slip away really easily without noticing. And that's one thing that concerns me with government's involvement in this space is that issue.
You want to go again? No. So 5 years from now, Bahamas, some good wine, my wife, son, private jet. Oh, wait. Were you asking about identity management 5 years from now, or personal?
This isn't Facebook, Mano.
Oh, okay. So 5 years from now, talking about identity management, you've heard about software as a service, SaaS, right? Potential for identity as a service, but don't try to make an acronym out of that, because it actually will spell out IaaS. But I would tell you this, if this is the way I look at it, the best predictor of the future is the one who creates it. And so if you and I, sit together and we put our brains together to create the future, we look at leveraging whether it's going to be, even if it's not completed standards that we have per se as now, for agility and for interoperability and for things to scale in years to come from now. If you and I looking at our applications, our software, as part of a critical component in this whole framework of identity management, at least just the technological side of things, then we have the process elements to look at, and then the people elements to look at, which will go into awareness and aspects of people being the defense. We'd be actually in a much better state 5 years from now. Hopefully, we won't have to have another panel 5 years from now to discuss about identity management. Definitely not with Jeff. No.
So Jeff, the people in this room passed up Jeremiah Grossman's talk, and so they must really be interested in identity management. How can we get them involved in the OWASP project?
Right.
Okay, just asking him if they want to be in the security in your project, what should they do?
We're out of time, Shane.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So just contact me if you want to get involved in a security ecosystem, whether it's related to identity or something else. You got an opportunity to really make a difference. There's a huge number of topics in application security that